Today I'm going to be talking about child abuse and how to recognize the warning signs and what to do if you do suspect that child abuse is occurring. You may think that child abuse can't happen to people you know, but you would actually be pretty surprised. The media is actually penetrated with TV shows that utilize child maltreatment as their storyline, such as Law & Order, ER, and Judge and Amy. It is actually pretty disheartening to fathom, but physical child abuse does not only happen on the TVs in our living rooms, but it actually occurs within children that we actually may come in contact with. According to the United States Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, in 2005, about 6 million cases of suspected child maltreatment were reported to Child Protective Services. Of those 6 million cases, about 30% were found to have at least one child being abused or neglected, which translates to 1.8 million maltreated children within the United States in 2005. Furthermore, the Department of Health and Human Services stated that 80% of these children are actually abused by their parents. This destroys the myth that the biggest threat and most likely perpetrators of child abuse are strangers. Today, I will be discussing child abuse and its warning signs, as well as give you some pointers on what to do if you suspect that a child is being abused. First, we need to provide clear parameters as to what constitutes child abuse, and thus what would be handled seriously if it were actually reported. Different people have differing opinions of child abuse, so it's best to look at the federal government's definition for a concrete, consistent idea of what child abuse actually is. Federal law explicitly defines child abuse in the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, as amended by the Keeping Children and Families Safe Act of 2003, as any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual harm or exploitation, or any act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk or serious harm. And a child, just so everybody knows the clear definition of a child, is anyone who is under the age of 18 or who is not an emancipated minor. Now that you know exactly what constitutes child abuse and likewise what constitutes a child, we will discuss the warning signs of child abuse. Children indeed display warning signs when they're experiencing physical abuse. However, it is important to keep in mind that just because a child exhibits one of these warning signs, that they're not necessarily being abused. Therefore, it is crucial to keep a rational heart and a rational mind when you're going to file a report. According to the United States Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families Information Welfare Gateway, signs that a child could be suffering from abuse or neglect include that the child shows sporadic changes in behavior or school performance, has physical or medical issues that have not been remedied even after being brought to the parent's attention. The child has a hard time concentrating, and this isn't attributed to any kind of behavioral or learning disability. That the child is high-strung and paranoid, overly watchful as if suspecting that something bad is going to happen, is exceedingly compliant, passive, or withdrawn, and does not want to go home. Also, there are physical signs of child abuse, which I'm sure pretty much all of you even stated before that you're familiar with: bruises, marks, burns, whatever. So let's say that you do indeed suspect that a child is being physically abused. After noticing that the child is displaying several of the signs that I have previously mentioned, how responsible are you to let somebody know about your suspicions? Now, in my audience analysis, I found that some of you believe that any person is legally responsible to report suspected child maltreatment, which is actually good because it couldn't hurt to have that belief. But actually, if the signs are present and the suspicion has arisen that a child is being physically abused, then it is the legal responsibility of only the following individuals: social workers, teachers, and other school personnel, physicians and other healthcare providers, mental health professionals, child care providers, medical examiners or coroners, and law enforcement officials. From January, Kate Lombardi of the New York Times found that from January of 2007 to October of 2007, 73% of the reports made in a select New York county were made by mandatory reporters. Of those cases, 35% required intervention, and the other 65% of the cases were closed due to insufficient evidence. However, in 18 states and Puerto Rico, any person who suspects that child abuse is occurring is legally responsible to report it. Those states include Alabama, California, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. Even though we live in Pennsylvania and are therefore not legally bound to report child abuse, as none of us here, well actually we have a teacher here, but none of us here are legally responsible to report it, I implore you that you still feel a sense of moral obligation to report any suspicions that you may have. So the next step, after wrestling with your moral demons and fears that you could be doing something wrong, is to report your suspected child abuse. So you should follow these steps when it comes time to report child abuse. Contact your state child abuse hotline, call a local Child Protective Services agency or law enforcement agency so professionals can properly analyze the situation. When calling to make a report of potential child abuse, be sure to be equipped with the following information: the name of the child and their location, the suspected perpetrator's name and their relationship to the child if it's known, a description of what you've seen or heard regarding the abuse, and any other people who have who may know of the abuse, and your name and telephone number. However, if you feel deterred from reporting child abuse because you don't want to provide your name and your number, you can file a report anonymously. And most states actually provide immunity against civil liability, so people don't feel deterred from filing a report because they're afraid of getting in trouble. Conversely, though, you should be aware that you can also face penalties in some states if you give a false report. After filing your report, what should you expect? First, your report will be evaluated by a Child Protective Services staff member, and if the worker feels that there's enough credible information to show that child maltreatment has occurred or will occur in the future, then the case will be referred to a staff member who will conduct an investigation. Usually the investigator will call within a few hours to a few days of when you filed the report, depending on the urgency and the severity of the information that was given. The investigator will also most likely speak with anybody who comes in contact with a child. That includes doctors, caregivers, etc. If the investigator discovers that there is not enough evidence to support the state's definition of abuse or neglect, then the case will be closed and the family could possibly be referred elsewhere for some kind of services, psychological, whatever's needed. If the investigator feels that a child is at risk of harm, then the family may be referred to services which will reduce the possibility of future maltreatment. And in some rare cases, the child will actually be removed from the home because the safety of the child is unsure for that time. If there were more eyes watching out for our children, perhaps we could deter child abuse from happening in the first place. But for now, we can only raise awareness and become aware ourselves. The effects of child abuse on a child's mental health are endless and oftentimes stretch into the child's adult life. The sooner that someone steps in and stops actual abuse from happening, the sooner the child can begin their healing process. Hopefully, the speech has touched you in such a way that you feel an urgency and provide your eyes, your ears, and your voice to our most innocent victims. Okay, any questions? No? You guys okay?